I was in the book of Ephesians. It talks about the gifts and stuff, and so one of the things I wanted to share with you as I was going through this, I got to get these things, is that when we start thinking about spiritual gifts and what God has given us out of the book of Ephesians says that we are of one body. It talks about unity in the body. And again, we talk about the body of Christ being his bride, his church. And so many times what we end up doing is we end up kind of separating. And so what they kind of do in many ways, I talked to you this morning about taking that spiritual gift test, okay? And for those of you that weren't here, what I was asking for is your name and your email address, if you would give it to me. And then what I'm going to do is I'll give you a link. And what you do is you'll go out and you'll answer like 108 questions or something like that. And what it does is you don't get it like this because my printer is really stupid. Well, really, I tell it to print two-sided, okay? So here's the two-sided. I have page 2 of 11, and so you would think on the other side would be 1 of 11, right? No, it's not. 1 of 11 is on this side, and on the back side of this is 4 of 11. Okay. And then there's 3 of 11, and then I don't know what this one is, 6 of 11. So it's got some goofy counting. So what happens is when you start looking at spiritual gifts, they kind of divide them up into 3 different categories. And when we start talking about spiritual gifts within the church, and we start talking about how you can use them, and so what we end up doing is you end up with what they call these are called the miracle gifts. Okay, and the miracle gifts you can generally understand what those are. Those are things. Sometimes they're called charismatic gifts and things like that. They're the gifts, what they call the apostles. I think they call healing, tongues, if I can spell, and one more. Interpretation of the tongues. Miracles. I think those are the 5, right? Did I get them right? And so what happens is a lot of people, there's so much debate as to whether these still exist today because you've got a lot of people go around, they do healing crusades. They tell you, come to me and I'll touch you and heal you and everything. And a lot of discussion goes on about that. And part of that is because when you started looking at, for instance, apostles, in order to actually be an apostle, you had to have seen Jesus face to face. Okay? And so Paul, some say, well, he wasn't alive when Jesus was. But what happened was he actually saw Jesus on the Damascus Road. He had an encounter with the Lord. Today we're not apostles, okay? We're disciples. And what you had was you actually had 70 disciples, and you had 12 apostles. One being Judas. Judas ended up, dying, and so Paul ended up taking his place. And so, but today you'll hear some people call themselves apostles, okay? And they don't fit the need, or they don't fit the definition for that. You've got the healing, again, and the reason for the healing, the tongues, and the interpretation of tongues was because they didn't have the Word of God written down. All they had was the Old Testament. They didn't have the New Testament. Okay? We don't need to see a miracle to know that a miracle exists, because we've got the Word of God that tells us about the miracles. And that's where faith comes in. Okay? And so the other one is one, and it's called, these are called, these are called the enabling gifts. Now, what happens with the enabling gifts are individual gifts for each and every one of us, okay? And these are gifts that I don't need you to help me with this. I have to do it myself, okay? For instance, like the gift of faith. Every one of us, everybody in the whole world has saving faith. God has given every creation, man creation that He's given, He has given them enough faith to be saved. Okay? Now, once we get saved, then we have what is called a sustaining faith. Okay? And this is the faith that you get. It starts, remember, it starts like a seed of a mustard seed. Okay? It's a little faith. And what happens is, as you nurture that faith, it begins to grow. And you'll find some people that will have a lot of faith, some people that will have not so much. Okay? But that's based on the individual. That's not based upon God. That's based upon us, okay? So these are the things that's called enabling faith. You also, not only do you have faith, but you have discernment. Okay? Remember what Jesus said? Jesus said, "My sheep know my name, and they follow no other." He also says to try the Spirit to see whether they be of God or not. Okay? So, let's say, for instance, that I get this a lot of times. People will come up to me and they'll say, "Pastor, how do I know if this voice or feeling that I'm having, how do I know if it's of God or of Satan?" Okay? And so I'll ask them a question. And part of the question is this part of the character of God? For instance, let me just throw something out. Somebody came up and said something to you and irritated you. You didn't like it. And so you hauled off and slapped them. And they say, "Well, you're a Christian. Why'd you do that?" "Because God told me to." And I'd say, "Really? God's character is not to tell you to provoke someone or hit someone or retaliate. Remember, he says, 'Vengeance is mine,' saith the Lord." So if that is telling you to do that, then you would know that that's not of God. But the only way you would know that is because you've developed a relationship with God. It's in a marriage, same way, okay? Or in a friendship. When you first meet someone, you don't know much about that person. Then you get to know that person a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And when somebody comes up and tells you something about that individual, you'll say, "No, I don't believe that, because I'm pretty good friends with them, and I've never seen that aspect of them. And that's what happens as we get to know God. And that's how we learn the discernment, that's there. Another one of these gifts is called wisdom. And there's there's wisdom and there's knowledge. Okay? And sometimes people will believe that they're the same, and they're not. They're actually two different items in here. Okay. So what happens a lot of time is when you get how do I use this? When you get knowledge, and we'll talk about it in a minute. Knowledge is something that you use when you're teaching. Okay, you've learned this.
So we're taught knowledge.
You're
Something you know, and wisdom is something you understand.
I'll share in a minute. Okay. When in the aspect of a Christian, okay, you're given the gift of teaching. Okay, well, the way you get the gift of teaching is you've got to know the subject. Okay, so you're able to do it. Like for instance, you do cake baking and cake decorating. Okay, the way you do the cake baking or the cake decorating is you've got to learn. Okay, what ingredients do I need to put into that cake in order for that cake to rise or taste good or whatever I want that cake to do. If I want that cake to be nice and fluffy, there's certain ingredients that I'm going to have to put in there, okay, in order to do that. So what I'll do is I begin to share my knowledge through my teaching to people.
So what I've learned is my knowledge to pass on to others.
Part of it, yes. Okay.
So, you're saying that you have to have knowledge in order to teach, but having knowledge doesn't make you a teacher.
No, it doesn't make you a teacher. But in order to teach, you need to know the subject. Okay? To be able to get that over. Okay? Now, wisdom, when you begin to start talking about wisdom, part of that one, if I can get my notes here, is they use this kind of with kind of a which one was wisdom and discernment, because I need to make sure I get everything. Wisdom comes with, and you'll find another gift which is called exhortation. Okay. And this is helping. This is trying to help someone to kind of help them along. Okay. You gain knowledge. I'm gaining from basically learning. Okay. Wisdom I can get from trial and error. I can get wisdom from somebody passing me down something. I can get wisdom from, I don't need wisdom. Wisdom I'm not using in teaching. Knowledge I'm using in teaching. Okay, it's more of fact-based. Wisdom is stuff that as I'm learning, I'm not really going to use it as a teaching per se on a subject matter. But I may use it in a teaching for kids, for instance. I gained wisdom by touching a hot stove.
Experiences.
That's coming along. And you'll find wisdom is partly experience, but it's other aspects of your life that you're beginning to do this, okay? As a matter of fact, Jesus says this. He says, if anyone lacks knowledge, ask and I'll give to him. It's knowledge that I give to him. And this is where you're beginning to learn so you can teach others. Okay? But what happens when you take this spiritual gift? These are the things, again, a lot of people will believe, there's a whole big discussion as to whether any of these still exist today or not. And I'm not arguing anybody with it anymore. Let them go their own way.
It's not a permanent marker. I use that out on the front board all the
Okay.
time.
Was
Yeah.
it permanent?
No, it's not. It comes off wet. You need like a wet.
It's not dry erase?
Yeah, it's a wet erase. Okay, but what'll happen is,
Sorry.
huh? Oh no, that's okay. But what happens is that when you take this, and this is where sometimes people don't understand. In the church, to minister, there's gifts, and that you're going to use. And in the book of Ephesians, it begins to start talking about unity of the body and using and exercising of your gifts. And so what there are is what is called team gifts. Okay? And these gifts you get as an individual, but you don't use it as an individual. You use it as a group. That's all right.
I use that on the board out front all the time, so I knew it worked.
Yeah. Sitting
I
there.
was trying to trick you.
Yeah, sitting there, give this to the pastor, make it look like a fool. Who wrote on the board with the permanent marker? Oh, it was a pastor. Crazy kid. So what'll happen is, and if I can find these, there's like nine different gifts that are out there. And these are the gifts that you use as a team in the church. Okay? I think I was sharing with you. There was now, most of the time when you look at shepherding, you think, okay, well, that's a pastor. No, it's not necessarily. Okay? A person can have the gift of shepherding but not be a pastor. They don't have to be a pastor. Now, a pastor should have the gift of shepherding, okay? But unfortunately, not all pastors actually have the gift of shepherding, okay? They'll have some other gifts, that are in there. But shepherding is basically where you're caring for other people, okay? And so you can be a lay member in a church and have a huge concern for other people and being able to lead those people. For instance, you could be a small group leader. And in that small group, you're actually performing basically a thing of shepherding. Remember when Moses had all of the people, there's about 6 million people that came out of the Egypt and in the wilderness. And they're out there in the wilderness, and all these people would get up early in the morning to sit there and talk to Moses. And so they would stand in line. And so they would present the problem and their issue to Moses, and Moses would be the one to say, okay, here's how we solve this. Here's the answer to that. Well, all of those people never got through all day long. And so Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came up to him and says, Moses, you're killing the people. You're making them stand in that hot heat all day long to just get an audience with you, and they're going home and they never got an audience with Moses. You got to understand something. You can't solve all of the problems. So what you need to do, Moses, is you need to break this down a little bit. You need to have, let's say, 10,000 leaders, and each one of those leaders might have 100 people. And so, Moses, you need to talk to them. And then these 10,000 leaders that you got, you need to have maybe 500 people that are dealing with these guys. And then you need to have maybe 25 people that's dealing with those. And maybe you need 5 that's dealing with this. Moses, you've got to break it down into smaller pieces. Otherwise, you're going to kill everybody. And so what happens is you begin to learn how to shepherd when you break it down into these smaller groups. In doing this, you got to learn that I can't do this. And then one of the other ones that a lot of people think that all of a sudden, I hear this a lot, I do not have the gift of evangelism. I am not an evangelist. Evangelism and evangelists are totally 2 different things. Okay? An evangelist is somebody that basically, they're almost like a preacher, that basically will be able to tell the story in such a way, a Billy Graham. Okay? And Billy Graham would go and do crusades and all of this. He would do it in a huge market or a huge arena. Okay? Evangelism is not dealing with a huge, an evangelist will have the gift of evangelism because they're able to tell the story in such a wide array that they can reach a whole group of people. Evangelism can be one-on-one. It could be 1-on-2, 1-on-5. It's more of a personal thing to where I can sit down and share the gospel story with someone, okay, and leading them to the Lord.
I think, evangelism has to do with having a broken heart for the lost. And you've said to me before that you feel like every Christian should have that. And I don't, I will just admit, I don't have a broken heart for the lost. I feel like my gifts are more internal instead of external, so I've never considered myself to have the gift of evangelism. Expound on that a little bit. What do you think?
Okay. Well, here's where I come from. If I go back into Matthew chapter 28, verses 18 through 20, okay, Jesus said to go ye therefore into all the world. And what's he say? What's he say to do? He says make disciples. Okay, how do you make disciples?
Share the story of Christ.
Right. So now here's the deal. Not everybody is going in, and here's where we get caught up, I think, in this whole thing. Okay. Some people have a knack for sowing a seed. Okay. Like they'll go in and they'll see someone, for instance, and so let's just do with it this way. There are some people that are introverts and some people that are extroverts. An introvert is going to have a very difficult time sitting down and talking with someone about Jesus. Agree? But an introvert may not have a hard problem with saying to someone, here, listen, I'd like to share something with you. I go to this church. If you want to know anything about Jesus, here's a card, here's a website, and go. And so it's very easy for them to sow a seed. Okay? So what happened when you sowed the seed?
Somebody else?
Somebody else can water it.
Okay, when if I take a tomato seed today and plant it, have I made a tomato?
No, not really.
No, not yet, right? Because something else is going to have to come along. And this is where I'm saying evangelism is more than just a one-shot approach. It's a conglomeration of all of us. That's why this is a team.
But I go to the heart thing because like that, I can talk to somebody. If somebody says, how do you get saved? I'd be glad to tell them, and I certainly can do that. So it's not that, it's just this, I don't have this burning desire to go out to the hedges and the byways and call people in. I don't have that desire. And it's, it's terrible to admit that, but it's true. And so it makes me feel like I'm not the kind of Christian that I should be.
Not everybody is comfortable doing this. I mean, I'll be honest with you, not everybody is comfortable doing this.
So not everyone has that gift.
They have a smidgen of it,
Okay.
okay?
What about if somebody planted that seed
And here's,
and now they dwell on it and they come and ask you?
Yeah, I can do that,
Well,
no
no.
problem.
and so this is what will happen.
The water in that seed to make it grow.
There are
Yeah, I can.
somebody that just got saved. They can't tell you much. They can tell you little. Okay? But if it goes to a deep discussion, it's over their head. Okay? So then they feel like they're a failure. I didn't. And this is where too many people let me just explain it this way, the best way I can, okay? Baseball team. You've got 9 players on both sides, and they do offense or they play the field or they come up to hit. Okay? That second baseman is not known for throwing strikes. The second baseman, first baseman, and all of those guys, they're there for a defense. They've got a characteristic of catching the ball. That pitcher can throw as many strikes as he wants, and if they hit it, and the fielders aren't catching it, the team's going to lose. So everybody's got to know what their aspect of it is. And the same thing with evangelism. There are going to be some people that are very good at planting seeds. They're really good at being able to hand out cards, pass out tracts. They're really good to just start a conversation, okay, to get it moving. Now you've got other people that can come right along and say, okay, yeah, I can lead them through the 4 spiritual laws, or I can lead them down the Roman road, or I can do this and I can do that, okay? Or I can do part of it. So they come along and they start watering, okay? Or it may not even be to that aspect, but an aspect of you've got somebody that maybe, and we'll talk about it, a gift of mercy. So you've got a lost person that's coming up, and they're really going through a lot of issues and a lot of problems. And so I can sit there and listen to the problems and help them with their problems in developing that relationship with them. And it may be that what I say to them is, hey, I've got a small group that I'm involved with over here. Why don't you come join our small group? And they come. small group leader or somebody else in there starts talking to that person as they begin to start opening up with everyone else. And then all of a sudden, they lead them, they ask the question, well, hold on a minute. I hear you guys talking about all this stuff. How do I get that? How do I experience that? And so you've got somebody in that small group that can help close the deal or do that. So every one of us, we may not say that we have the gift of evangelism, but every one of us are part of the evangelism. It may not be, like when I took the test, my score on evangelism was like, if I can find the next page that this thing's supposed to go on. Where's my page 1? Okay. My score for evangelism was a 19. Okay. My score for shepherding was 20. And for teaching, it's like 12.
They scored you well for teaching.
It's just according to the answers that I gave, And so that doesn't mean that I don't have the gift of teaching. It just means that, and honestly, when I started thinking about it, I started thinking about it, you know what? I think they have switched in my life because, honestly, think about it. What have I been handing out to you guys? And what have I been talking to you guys? I've been doing my best to give you anything that I can get in your hands to start a conversation, a gospel conversation with people. Why? Because my burning desire really, honestly, is here and not as much here anymore.
And that's what I'm talking about. I can see you having the gift of evangelism.
Yeah. I'm not an evangelist.
Right.
Okay.
But you have that burning heart desire thing
Yeah.
that
And I mean, it is. It's just, I mean, I've always, my next one was mercy, and mercy was like 17 in there. And so what I'm saying is that when you take this spiritual gift test, it will help you to understand where you're at. And these here are not gifts that you use as individuals. These are gifts that you use as a team. And that's why he says that it's the body, And this is why, guys and gals, that I am so much more pointed in the area of serving in the church, finding where you've heard me say for a few years now, it's time to get off the bench and get into the game. Because for so long what's happened, and we as Christians have sat back and we've used the 80-20 rule. 80% of all of the work in the church is done by 20% of the people. That was in the 60s and the 70s. That is no longer the formula. The formula now is that 90% of the work is done by 10% of the people. And this is why a lot of churches are no longer reaching out. They don't have the resources. They've got the resources, but they haven't been able to utilize those resources.
A lot of churches are closing.
It is. Because if only 10% of the people are doing the work, can I tell you where most of that 10% is happening? The 10% of the people are 50 and over. You're finding a lot of the people that are less than 40 are not doing the work. A lot of that is because they have families and their kids are involved in everything. They're going every which direction. And it's a society that we've come to. We've come to a society that we no longer talk to each other. We text message. You know, we even talk about, you know, we've got cell phones. But most of the time, think about it. These are telephones. How much conversation do you actually hold on this as a telephone?
Not as much as texting.
Very little. We have lost the art of communication.
Yes.
And this is why we're not seeing the church grow. Because we've lost how to talk to each other. And so this is why I come back, and this is why I'm pushing so much. Because you know, number one, please understand this, the church will never die. That is a promise. Jesus Christ said, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. The church will live. But the problem is, in what state will it live? Because if you listen to Dr. Jeremiah, if Dr. Jeremiah is right, we have just come out of the Philadelphia age in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and 80s, and we are now in the church of Laodicea, where he cannot tell whether we're hot or cold. And the church of Laodicea, he said, you make me sick. If you think about it, what's being taught in churches today nauseates God. We're arguing over worship. What is worship? What style of worship? What style of song? That's ridiculous. We should never be arguing over style of song. If a song exalts the Lord, it is biblical, then it should be sung. You know, the whole idea about, and this is where I get into this war of people. I'm a very strong person about using the right words. When they started saying, this is praise and worship music and this is hymns. And all along when they started that, I said, this is garbage, guys. You're going down the wrong path. And the reason is we had the same wars in the 1400s and the 1500s when they started writing these songs and they started singing what we call today hymns. And they were getting away from what the church was singing in the Psalms and everything else. And then they started, you know, with music and getting more and more musical instruments and everything else and saying, oh, okay, too much music in the church. And I go back to the book of Psalms, and the book of Psalms says it has every type of music in there. And then when we went through the 60s and they said drums were the instrument of the devil, you know, because it was from the bowels of Africa and whatever, you know, and it's like, hold on a minute. They had drums back in the Bible. Even before Africa existed, I think, I don't know. And so what we've done is we've divided the team. And so this is why I was asking today for this, because I need y'all to take this. So we need to know, what's this team got? So we can take the strengths of this team and start using it for the way God purposed it to be used. How can we help you become part of the team and become active? Does that mean that you have to do everything? No. They ain't, nobody should do everything.
That's the problem with the 10% though.
I know.
They're the people out, and then they just want to.
Yep. And what happens is this. When we start saying that we've got to do this, we've got to do this, we've got to do this with the 10%, and you can't. And what happens is you wear the people out physically, okay? Physically, we're burnt out. Not spiritual burnout, physical burnout, okay? And they're different. They're not the same. We get physically burnt out when we do church work, okay? When you do kingdom work, you don't get burnt out, okay? Because you know your limitations of what they are. And there are sometimes it's okay to say no. Just flat out, no. And here's why. Because God said He would add to the church daily as what is needed. And so this is what, when we come down to the book of Ephesians, this is what Ephesians is all about. Because if you go back to the letter in the book of Revelation, what Jesus said to the church at Ephesus, He says, let me say something to you. He said, you guys are awesome. You knew how to love people. You knew how to show people that you care. He said, when people would come up to you, you knew how to show mercy. You did it as a body, not as an individual. You did it as a body. You knew how to teach. You knew how to do exhortation, evangelism, serving, giving, administration. You knew how to do all of those things. And you did it well, and you did it with love. But the problem is you've lost your first love. He says you need to go back to there. And unfortunately, that's where the church needs to go back to, is the basics. You know, everybody comes along and they want to teach you how to do everything. And we try to emulate what all of these other people were doing. And let me say this to you. You can't build a church. Every church in Middletown cannot have 20 to 30,000 people. If they did, you'd only have 1 or 2 churches. And that's what's happening. Everybody's trying to get to the big church, the 20 to 30 to 40,000. And that wasn't where it was. Most of the time, they didn't even have a church. They had a home. You know? And that's where everybody got together. And what did they do? They built relationships. And then they would come to the synagogue on the day of worship, or go back to Little House on the Prairie. Remember, what was their names? Huh? Yeah, but what was the family name? Ingalls. Okay, so it was the Ingle family, and it was Charles and his wife, Caroline, and then the 3 girls, and then later on the little boy, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, and they lived way over here, and they had let's say they had their 60 acres, and then you had somebody else that lived over here, and they had their 60 acres, and somebody else that had theirs, and somebody had this, and somebody had that, and how did they communicate to each other?
They went over to each other's house.
Sometimes it would be to each other's house, but most of the time it's when they went into town.
Yeah.
Tell the church.
You would go into town to buy your goods and stuff, and then on Sunday, everybody would cook their dinners, and they would come in, and they would go to church. And then after church, they didn't get up and go home. The kids are out here playing with each other. The adults are talking with each other, developing relationships. How's things going? I heard you were sick. How are you doing? Is there anything we could do for you? You know? Hey, I heard you needed your barn, you know, something wrong with your barn. Can we come help you? And that's what they did. And we've lost that. It's that old song. You've lost that love and feeling. You know, and a lot of times in the church, that's what we've lost. We've lost the communication. You know, I mean, it's the same thing. You go into a restaurant, mom, dad, and 3 kids. They don't even talk to each other. It's like they're sitting there texting each other. And they're right across the table. You know, it's like, raise your head up. You know, that's why sometimes I thought about putting up this is a no techie zone in the sanctuary. You know, but then we'd all have it. But anyway, once I get you all to fill that out, I appreciate it. And I will send you the link probably in the morning. It'll either be tonight or it probably won't be tonight. It'll probably be in the morning that I'll send you a link sometime tomorrow. And you just go out, and then what you'll have to do is you'll put your name and stuff in there, and then it will tell you your top 3. Okay. And then it also gives you, if I can find the right pages, okay, it talks about what's your dominant gifts, okay, and it starts explaining how you can use those gifts.
And those results will come to you and to you?
Yes, yes, and
Just to be clear.
That was a good
Just to be
question.
clear.
what did you think I was only going to give them to you?
I was gonna ask, do we have to turn these into you? Now you're getting them? I don't know.
Yeah,
now.
no, and the reason for this, okay, is very plain. Yeah, part of mine is teaching, okay, and I understand that too. But also, it's how can we take, if you've got the gift of evangelism, how can we help teach you how to use that and help it to grow? You know, because we're not a church for everybody. Okay? We number one, we don't have the facilities to handle everybody or the resources to handle everybody. Some people say, why don't you guys have a food closet or a food pantry or a clothes closet? Okay? Why? Salvation Army has a great food pantry or a clothes closet. There's some other churches that have the facilities for it, they have the resources for it, and everything else. So why should I duplicate something that they're doing? Okay? It just doesn't make sense. You know? So, okay, so God, so what are you calling us to do? And I think what you find out is what I believe what God is calling us to do is really, we have a love for kids more than a lot. But it isn't just the kids. I think if you realize where we're coming from is when I went to Somerville, and we started with it was like, it was in July, I think when I got there, June, July. And they said, okay, so how are we going to build this stuff? And I asked them, the very first thing I asked them says, what do you guys do with VBS? And they said, well, we generally have about 11, 12 kids. Is about what we have. Okay. Well, what we want to do is we want to go out and reach these kids, because when I would drive through Somerville, there were kids all over the corner. They were everywhere. They just didn't have a place to go. They didn't have anything to do except hang out on the corner. Okay? So it was like, okay, so let's go make friends with these kids. And we ended up with what, about 50, 60 kids?
Yeah, we had over 101 of them.
Yeah. But I think within just one month of getting there and throwing a VBS together, we ended up with about 50, 60 kids.
Yeah. We had a school bus collecting them.
Yes. and so we had all these kids. Well, guess what ended up happening? We started getting parents. We started getting the Chets, the Carols, the Kathy, the Elberts. And we started seeing them coming along and everything. Because why? We were doing kid stuff. Do kid stuff, parents come to see their kids doing these things. So we would have all kinds of events and things that we would do. And it became a family where everybody began to really, and it wasn't just a biological family. It was a church that became a family.
You know, my daughter was telling me there's a person that she wasn't particularly close to, but this person really reached out to the boys. And just the way that she saw this person interacting with the boys, she said that it really softened her heart towards that person. It's my daughter-in-law. She and my daughter-in-law weren't real close, but once my daughter-in-law started really reaching out to her boys, it softened her heart. And now she thinks a lot of my daughter-in-law. And I think that's true even in the church. When you're nice to the kids and you start reaching out and really making over the kids, parents are like, oh, well, yeah, I like these people. I might come back. And so, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
And so what, a lot of times you might think that what I'm doing is chaotic and stuff, but it does have a sense of order to it as to, okay, what can we do? God, where are you asking us to go? What are you asking us to do? What's our niche? Because our niche isn't everything, And there are times I get phone calls all the time, or I get emails all the time. Hey, somebody's looking for a church. Okay, what are they looking for? And I'll send them places that I know. They're in this area or they're in that area, because I know that not everybody's going to. I hear people all the time say, well, "You're too far away," and I say, "Where you live?" And they'll say, "Hamilton." And I'll say, "Dude, what?" Come on. I said, or I hear people all the time, "It's too far to drive," and I said, "You know what? I drove to work to Columbus 2 hours one way, and for the longest time I was driving back and forth every day, 4 hours, besides a 9-hour work time, and most of them were not 9 hours. Maybe in the beginning they may have been 9, but then it started getting like 12, 13, 14, and they were starting to say, and I enjoyed. Ask my wife, I enjoyed what I did, and because I enjoyed what I did, that drive, it didn't hurt me. If you enjoy the church,
There you go.
a 2-hour drive is okay.
I used to drive to Indiana for a home church.
And so when people say, "No, I need a church close by here," maybe God's asking you to go over here, because you've got one of those gifts that is needed at this place and at this spot at this time to be able to do what it is that God's asking us to do as a team, not as individuals. Okay, church is not an individual sport; it's a team sport, and that's why we're trying to find these things. What are these things that you guys possess that we can use to help this team?
I have one more question. I know I've been talking too much, but that's what you get from me being in here.
I know.
So the talents instead of gifts. So we're to exercise our talents and our gifts?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, your talents. I mean, you could have a God-given talent, for instance, to play music, and you could have been in the bars using that talent. And once you get saved, doesn't mean, well, I'm not going to use that talent anymore of music because it keeps bringing back the memories of bars. No, God.
we should do both.
You
We
should.
shouldn't just use talents and not gifts. We shouldn't just use gifts and not
Your
talents.
talents, your gifts should be using your talents, whatever your talents are.
That was deep.
Okay, let me erase this, and I'll tell you what I'm talking about. I'll just use an example. Let's say you've got a talent to make stuff. I don't know. What could we make?
Carpentry.
Okay, so I got a. That's not me, but it might be somebody else. Okay, so you have the gift of carpentry to make stuff. Okay, so in there, I could have the gift of teaching. Okay, and so maybe one of my other gifts is evangelism. Now I've got a talent to make things of carpentry. What I can do is I could say, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to do a class on carpentry. Okay, so what am I going to do? I'm using part of my teaching, because I know how to do this, or I'll just use your cake baking. Okay, so I could use a cake baking aspect of it, and so what am I doing? I'm going to have a class on cake decorating 101, or cake 101, or whatever. Okay, baking cakes or decorating cakes or whatever else. So I'm going to teach how to do cake decorating. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to do a cake decorating class, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to offer that to the public for free. I'm not going to charge anything. And I'm going to use the facilities of the church to do this. I'm going to do it in the church or my house or whatever. So I'm teaching people how to do cake decorating, but at the same time, while I'm doing the cake decorating and putting in the ingredients of the cake, I may start throwing in some stuff about Christian life, Christian walk, problems in life. For instance, somebody keeps talking about how much of a problem that they have and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And so you could start talking about in there, okay, well, if I take and put this ingredient in this cake, here's what's going to happen to that cake. It's going to taste bad, or it's not going to rise, or whatever else. It's the same thing with your life. If you put this ingredient into your life, here's what's going to happen to your life. So I can take my talent as a cake decorator and use my spiritual gifts of teaching and evangelism. I don't discard my talents.
I know, and I was just saying, not can you, but should you? Like, you shouldn't use exclusively your talents and not use your gifts.
No, they should marry themselves. And the reason for that is I'm a firm believer that when God said that I had a plan for you, even before you were born, I believe that God-given talents and things that God knows that He gave you to do, to be able to do, He gave them to you for a reason. And when you become a Christian, you don't throw those things away. You use those to be able to help people in using whatever God-given gifts to be able to marry all of this together with your spiritual abilities, your heart, your spiritual gifts, your heart, your abilities, your personality, and your experiences. To be able to do that. Okay? So this is what Ephesians is all about, guys, in wrapping it up. It's how can we take what it is that God has given us and bring it into the church, use it in the ministry to be able to go out and share it with other people, as well as being armed against the enemy.
Hello, this is Pastor Chuck Cotton from Calvary Baptist Church. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for taking the time out to either listen to our sermon or to watch it on video. We are grateful that you've actually taken the time and hope and pray that it has been a blessing to you as it was to us as we delivered it to our congregation. We ask if you have any questions whatsoever that you email us at pastorchuck@calvarybaptistmiddletown.org, or you could come in and give us a phone call, if you would please, at area code 513-423-7251. I'd like to take this opportunity to also invite you to come to our church and visit us, if you would please. We actually have small groups on Sunday morning starting at 9:30, with our morning worship following at 10:45. Prior to our morning small groups, we also provide donuts with coffee, milk, orange juice, a time for fellowship, get to know each other, have a good time before we actually break out into our small groups for Sunday. Our worship services are uplifting, they're fast moving, and everything in our service is just so fast paced. But we do take time every once in a while to slow down as we feel the Holy Spirit moving, and we never want to hinder it in any way. We also have on Sunday evening, during the school year, we have Awana, and Awana starts with the Puggles, actually from age 2 all the way up through high school. And during that period of time, we also have a worship service. Both of these start at 6 o'clock and end at 7:30. Our Wednesday night, we have a Bible study, which starts at 7. We generally finish about 8:15. We would love for you to come and visit with us. Don't have to dress up. Just come as you are, because to us, it doesn't matter. You're a child of God, a creation of His, and so to us, you're important to everything that we do. Our motto here is building the kingdom one life at a time, and we hope that we have a chance to visit with you, get to know you as you get to know us. So thank you, and may God bless you.